Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Langley, and welcome to the latest episode of the Manufacturing IT podcast. I'm joined today by Matthew Miller. Matthew is the head of global operations technology at Sun Chemical. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure, Matthew. And someone I know you and I have been connected for a little while on LinkedIn, and I saw you kind of got some really strong manufacturing industry experience. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you onto the podcast and get your take on how digital transformation is changing across multiple different industries. But it'd be great for you to introduce yourselves to the podcast and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I've been in the manufacturing industry for about 30 years now, in all different kinds of aspects. And I started off working for an engineering firm, did a lot of work for a local company most people recognize called P&G. Worked all over U.S. and South America as well, doing different projects, and then went from there to a pharmaceutical company. I was at pharmaceutical company. I ran both their IT and OT groups at our largest manufacturing operation, and did some pretty advanced things at the time for our control systems there. And then moved from there for the textile industry. We were working for the largest manufacturer of sheets and towels for the hospitality and hospitals industry, and doing the same thing there. We're trying to take data from manufacturing and use it to improve overall operations. And then from there, I moved on to my current role, which is at Sun Chemical, which is looking at their OT group, building their OT operations out, and really taking a digital look at how we operate and how we can improve operations overall.
Yeah, it's a really interesting career path, Matt. And I think from my perspective, I work a lot with technology companies who are priming companies, manufacturers for digital transformation or other digital initiatives. And I guess one of the things I'm always really keen on the podcast is to have the conversation from somebody who's traditionally on the customer side or the end user side. So how have you seen things change in the last 25, 30 years or so towards more digitalization from the manufacturing side?
Well, I think it's changed. I mean, obviously PLCs have been around for a long time. But early on, I remember connecting a laptop up to a serial port on a PLC to download, data into Excel or into Access or something or other. Which again, nothing back then was connected. Nothing was networked. Nothing was. All the data was in islands out there, and there wasn't really anybody collecting data. It was more or less just the PLCs were something to run the process. So obviously today, the data is almost a king. I mean, it's more important to get that data to be able to see how your operations are running and to predict how when maintenance is going to be needed. When be able to compare batches from one to another, all those kinds of things have definitely changed dramatically over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I think so. And if I look at your experience, obviously you've got experience through the whole kind of ISO 95 pyramid from the ERP layer right down to the kind of controls and, as you mentioned, the PLC side. So how have you found that kind of digital maturity within manufacturers through that pyramid now?
How are manufacturing companies using that? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I think it's definitely as you get more and more connected. I'm always surprised. It's always fascinated me going into any industry of the scale of things, of what it takes to manufacture, I don't know, toilet paper to pretzels to inks and dyes, whatever else. I mean, no one really imagines what scale you're talking about when you're doing it at an industrial level. But being able to take the pyramid and basically start to integrate all those different pieces together. Obviously, like you said, on the bottom is the PLCs and the sensors. that is great information down there. But if all it's doing is controlling your process at the time, obviously we can pull all that data into a database nowadays, and really try to optimize overall operations or uptime, and really try to I mean, really, again, a lot of companies are going to be becoming, in a sense, data companies more than they are just a manufacturing company. So if you can harness all that information that you have out there to improve your operations, and also possibly even partner with your up and down the supply chain as well. There's ways that if you can share information with your customers, or you can see maybe when they're running low on volumes of your ink or something like that, where we could ship when they need them. Those kind of things are definitely important.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one, and this is something I was kind of also keen to ask you, Matt. Is obviously a lot of our listeners on the podcast who may be coming from one industry and maybe not had as much exposure to kind of the different verticals that you have. So, how does the manufacturing change across textile, pharma, and chemical for you? Like, what are the big challenges that you see in manufacturing of those different areas?
I mean, ultimately, manufacturing is manufacturing, right? You put in, raw materials. It comes out with a finished product, and your finished product might not be the one that actually gets to the consumer. It might actually be part of the supply chain still.
Sure.
That somebody else might go like. I mean, right now with Sun, most of the stuff that we ship actually goes into somebody else's product. If it's paint or makeup or whatever it is. But being able to um, manufacture all the different products that are out there, and be able to do it in a more efficient way by understanding your process to a deeper level, not just hitting start and walking away from the equipment.
Yeah, no, I guess from my side, what I like to see really with companies is that kind of innovation, and I mean you touched upon it as well, from moving just kind of making a finished product to the data side and kind of making use of that data. Is there any insights that you can share about kind of great use cases of where you've seen companies or even the companies that you work for make great use cases for the data that they collect and how they can utilize that better?
Yeah, I mean, I can go back to one of the pharmaceutical company I used to work for. It was a batch process that we made. It was about a week long process, and there were some key pieces to that process. Of you had to have high levels of control during those key moments of the process, or you'd end up scrapping a batch. And scrapping a batch of this product was a couple $1 million.
Wow,
And
wow.
so you didn't want that to happen. But then the other piece of that was, if it did happen, you wanted to learn from it, and
Mm.
you wanted to be able to compare it to other good batches and see where it went wrong. And we had developed, well, for one, we had developed a historian with our system, and most of the stack was Rockwell, but the historian at the time, they I don't believe they had one, or one wasn't what we actually were looking for. So we home grew that historian, and we were able to take that, and using a product, like I think it was called Minitab, and set up programming so we could actually pull all the data from each batch and overlay it on top of each other, and be able to see exactly where we deviated from the standard pretty instantly. Before we could do it, but it took an engineer probably about a week to download all the data and put it all into a spreadsheet, and to manipulate it what they needed to do and clean it up. But all those steps, we took those and put them into the program, so we literally could type in, how many batches do you want to look back, and
Wow.
on what product it was, and then 2 minutes later it had that overlay for us. So that's a huge time saver. Another big thing with pharma is there's no such thing as not having root cause. If
Okay.
you ever had a problem with the product, you had to have a root cause. You could not just say, it's just a fluke. We couldn't move on. You could say that, but then you're scrapping your batch and
Yeah.
you're throwing that money away. So we always had to push into the root cause. And as you probably know, pharma is a different industry than a lot of other industries.
Yeah.
They in some ways have deeper pockets just because of the cost of the drugs and so forth. But I've learned a lot from that to take it to other businesses, other industries. But also you have to remember that most industries don't ever need to go that far and
Yeah.
have if you have a little bit of error and making a sheet is not going to hurt anybody compared to if you have an injectable that had some problems.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting things about working. And when I speak to a lot of people who have time in the kind of pharma, biotech, biopharma space, is that the cost to scrap a batch is so incredibly high that the traceability factor is huge as well. So I guess if you can cut your teeth in a manufacturing environment with that much scrutiny and regulation, then a lot of other manufacturing processes there gives that more degree of error, I guess, or degree of
Yeah.
flexibility.
Yeah, I'd say the first year or so after I left the pharmaceutical industry, it took me a little while to balance out a little bit compared to and say, why don't we want to get a root cause? So it's because, it doesn't really matter in a lot of industries. It just matters more about production and keeping the production high. But with that said, obviously the data piece is the same. So in the pharma, we were always looking to make sure that we had that data to prove that we had things in control. Now, if you
Yeah.
look at now how we look at data for either textile or ink, it's really how can we improve our overall operations and keep our equipment running. So is it looking at OEE calculations to know how long a piece of equipment's been running and it needs to have maintenance done? Or is it looking at vibration monitoring to see if the drive is vibrating more now than it was last week, and we need to probably take a look at it to see what's going on.
Yeah, no, challenges, of course, but I guess it's different degree of those challenges. Matt, I was curious, your journey across the different manufacturing verticals, was that something by design, or was that just by opportunity that you got that exposure through your career?
Yeah, I think it was by opportunity more than by
Yeah.
design. I mean, again, the early phases when I worked for an engineering firm in Cincinnati, and if you know, P&G is huge in Cincinnati. So I worked in all different kinds of industries there, and it was very fascinating to do. And IT really hadn't. There was some IT, maybe like mainframes, that kind of thing at that point. I'm dating myself a little bit, but when the desktop PC came into the environment, I sort of saw that as I was attracted to that, and it's like, why we should be using this a lot more here in our office. So we'd actually build our CAD stations ourselves and built the first network in the building, and really cut my teeth on that as well. So I mean, it was that early on engineering firm. I learned a lot of different things, and also how to travel too. That's another big piece too. Is I mean, believe it or not, a lot of people when you're young, just out of school, and they put you on assignments all over the country. Knowing how to get there and so forth before your iPhone GPS was available. So
Yeah.
learned lots of different things.
No, it's an interesting journey, Matt. And this was one of the other areas I was keen to ask, is obviously, you and I are working together on some recruitment activities, but how have you seen the kind of workforce change as manufacturing and digitalization in manufacturing has changed? Because one of the things that I'm always looking for is that how can we inspire more people to look at manufacturing as a career, but then also to kind of move from that, say, carpeted side of the business to the uncarpeted side, i.e. the manufacturing side. And how have you seen that kind of workforce change over the last, even 10 or 15 years or so?
Well, you run into multiple different kinds of people at manufacturing operations. A lot of times I'm working with the facility engineers or the facility maintenance personnel, but then also obviously working with the plant floor manufacturing people. So it's definitely, I mean, on the engineering and maintenance side of things, it's definitely more technology driven nowadays. You have a
Yeah.
lot more data. You have your inventory management systems. You have, your barcode systems in your shop warehouses and the engineers. I mean, to me, the best engineers I ever come across are always the ones that have a little bit of, if they're mechanical, they have to have a little bit of automation experience as well, because nothing mechanical today is not automated. I mean,
Yeah.
if it has gears and does something, it has to have some control to it. So I think there's more and more of that. I've found some of the best engineers actually come out of ChemE area because they have a very wide knowledge of experiences both in the process but in the controls and so forth.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that one of the goals of the podcast, Matt, is really to look at maybe inspiring to people to maybe either look at manufacturing or manufacturing operations as a destination for their career. Because I definitely see as we move in towards more of a smart factory environment that it's a really exciting place to work, and there are a lot of benefits to having that experience and exposure.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the big things that's changing now is as some of the older people that are retiring from manufacturing that have come up through the ranks of manufacturing. And when they first originally started, there wasn't any computers. There weren't maybe a little bit, maybe a few PLCs, but a lot of it might have been push buttons. That how they ran their operation. But kids today, I'd say kids, but 18 or 20-year-olds coming up are used to having their iPhone in their pocket all the time and be able to ask Google or Alexa anything and be able to get the answer. Um, I think when you're at the plant floor and a lot of places, sometimes it's safety issues because we have some areas that are explosion rated, so obviously you can't take electronic devices in there unless they're specific ones. So it can be a challenge sometimes for them to not say, why can't I have my phone on me, why can't I ask, be able to surf. And sometimes I think that's what we need to break those barriers down a little bit and say, the younger generation, they're going to work differently than the older generation, and we need to embrace that because they definitely have a deep amount of knowledge that we should be tapping into.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely, from what we see from a recruitment side, is that kind of younger generation coming into the market are much more digital native with iPads, iPhones, and that kind of connected environment. So I think there's two things that we see. It's that making that manufacturing environment more collaborative and having that kind of openness to accept the technology change, but also having an environment where the younger generation feel inspired and motivated to bring thoughts and discussions to the table. And I guess as one generation exits the workforce, another one enters it, and I guess there's got to be that kind of collaboration in the middle.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And the big challenge I think a lot of industries are having right now is that those older workers that are exiting the workforce are taking a huge amount of knowledge with them as well.
Yeah.
And how do we document that knowledge? How do we keep that knowledge for the next generation and or next multiple generations of people, because you want to learn from the past and how you improve it in the future.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, how has kind of COVID impacted maybe your teams or anything, Matt, with the work you've done over the last years with people needing to be on site because of manufacturing operations versus not able to come to site and stuff? Have you seen a huge impact on kind of people's mentality as we hopefully exit the other side of the pandemic now with their kind of working environments?
As far I can just speak a little bit to how it's impacted. I mean, I actually started at Sun during the pandemic. So it was early on in the pandemic. So I have an office, but I've only been to it about 3 times.
Okay.
And most of the people I work with aren't in my office. Most of the people, we're a global organization. So I have people in Europe. I have people in other cities and states in the U.S. So I really rarely see them face to face. One of the big issues we had was we weren't. The company stopped all inter-site travel for a while because they were afraid of taking infections from one site and to other sites. And obviously, the heart of any manufacturing operation is the people that are manufacturing the product. So we were trying to isolate them as much as we could. We put some pretty strict policies in place, and which they've obviously pulled off back now. But so that was a little bit of a challenge. Not, it's hard to imagine an operation or a site without seeing it firsthand.
Yes.
And understanding the issues that they have, or their overall operations. So I just had to rely on my local resources quite a bit more, and maybe ask for more documentation or pictures of things, and that kind of stuff to help us continue on. But overall, I think we've gotten better at it. But it was at first somewhat of a slowed the process down for projects and so forth. So it was a little challenging at times to get through.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I'm conscious of the time, man, and I appreciate you're a busy guy. But I just wanted to ask you, given your role at Sun Chemical now, head of global operations technology, what advice would you give to somebody who's building their career in manufacturing operations and sees what you've achieved as kind of where they want to get to? What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe at the start of their career journey, or a few years in, to kind of achieve the level of success that you've achieved and got to the level you've got to? What advice would you or could you share for them?
I mean, as we touched on earlier, talking about, I really didn't have my career mapped out for me. I didn't have, this is where I want to be in 15, 20 years. So what I would say there is just every different opportunity that you have, always look for those new opportunities and learn from each one. And you're always bringing in new knowledge, or possibly using the knowledge you had to fix the problem that you had there. But it's like a bank of information, and the more you bring, the more experiences you have, the more you can address the problems of your current day. So again, just be open, get out from behind your desk. I know that's a little bit different nowadays since we're home. Get on the plant floor, understand the process, talk to the operators. Learn from everybody you interface with. And then sometimes it's a little luck, and sometimes you need to push yourself to get out there and experience different things.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. I think some really, really good advice there to people. So, look, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast, Matt. I really appreciate your time and insight, and obviously great to hear your thoughts. So, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for having me.